Welcome back to AERO 3170, Aviation Safety. Presentation number 7 on textbook chapter 7 about proactive aviation safety. So what does proactive safety mean? Proactive safety occurs before an accident has a chance to happen. And the key word is before. Hazards that might not be obvious can be identified before an accident has a chance to happen. FOQA, FOCA, is an example of proactive safety. FOCA stands for Flight Operations Quality Assurance. And it's a proactive safety program that takes flight data from routine operations to detect hazards. FOCA is also known as FDM or FDA. FDM is used outside the U.S. and stands for Flight Data Monitoring. And FDA is used because the word monitoring means scrutiny of the crew and their actions. And that is kind of a negative connotation. FDA stands for Flight Data Analysis. FOCA is voluntary, but it's strongly recommended. It analyzes routine flight data to enable intervention when unsafe trends are discovered by analyzing that data. FOCA is generated and monitored by Part 121 and 135 air carriers. The routine flight data includes information about airspeed, configuration, bank angle, and descent rate. So if after examining data from FOCA, it is discovered, for example, that there is a particular approach where the rate of descent is excessive, then an investigation can be done to discover why and perhaps make a correction to prevent an unsafe condition. The data from a FOCA is prepared in a specific type of format, and identifying information is removed to protect the identities of crew members. Most FOCA programs include a gatekeeper who has access to identifying data, but is one of the responsibilities of the gatekeeper is to keep that information confidential. Once the FOCA data is extracted, it's analyzed and compared. Skilled analysts extract the data and identify data that would represent a safety event. For example, a descent rate in excess of 1,000 feet per minute on an approach would qualify as a safety event. And if there was a pattern discovered when analyzing the data, then an investigation again could be done to determine why this was the case at this particular airport on this particular approach and make recommendations to change that, to remove that safety event. So again, what type of event would require further investigation? Would a single unstable approach require further investigation if they didn't see a pattern? Perhaps not. It could be just an aberration on that approach, but a pattern of unstable approaches at a single airport may be a sign that there's a safety problem at that airport. So FOCA is a perfect example of a proactive safety program. FOCA takes data, analyzes the data from routine operations, and tries to identify safety issues before an accident has a chance to happen. So what is an ASRS and what agency is responsible for funding it? The ASRS is the Aviation Safety Reporting System, and it's funded by the FAA. It's a voluntary safety reporting system that anyone involved in aviation can file a report. Now the FAA funds the ASRS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System, but they don't administer it. So who is responsible for administration of the aviation safety reporting system, and why doesn't the FAA administer it? Well, NASA is responsible for administrating the ASRS. The FAA early on realized that because they're the regulatory agency and they have an enforcement role, that might discourage pilots from voluntarily making safety reports. When you submit a report to the Aviation Safety Reporting System, it's reviewed by safety analysts. How many safety analysts review these safety reports, and where are they sent? The safety reports are analyzed by a minimum of 2 safety analysts. It could be more depending on the scope of the problem, but a minimum of 2 safety analysts review every safety report. And those reports are sent to the NASA Ames Research Center, where the data is analyzed and entered into a computer system. If the safety analysts notice that there's a pattern to the safety report, for example, perhaps they notice that there have been several reports about the same problem, then the safety analysts can make a recommendation to the governing agency, for example the FAA, to maybe change procedures or perhaps look at airspace to determine if a change can be made to improve safety in that area. Now, while the identity of the person making the report is protected, the safety analysts may contact the person who submitted the report for further details if they have questions. So the ASRS, Aviation Safety Reporting System, has been around for a very long time, since 1975. How many reports do you think have been filed since the system began in 1975? Well, it's actually more than 1 million. I believe that the number is actually more than 1.5 million now. Since that time, not one reporter's identity has been breached. So who's responsible for generating ASRS reports, and is it just in the United States? Well, pilots and operators in aviation involved in safety incidents should file an ASRS report. And the system is not just limited to the US, it's global. But most of the data that is collected comes from the United States. Another proactive safety program is known as ASAP. So what does ASAP stand for, and what's the goal of this program? ASAP stands for the Aviation Safety Action Program. And the goal of the Aviation Safety Action Program is to prevent accidents and incidents by identifying unsafe conditions, unsafe practices, and correcting them before an accident has a chance to happen through these employee reports. So again, it's another proactive safety program. It's an attempt to identify a hazardous situation and correct it before an accident has a chance to happen. So how does ASAP encourage employees to report unsafe practices? Safety issues are resolved through corrective action. So it's known as a non-punitive proactive safety program. So instead of punishment, the program corrects unsafe conditions, unsafe practices through corrective action. The program's strategy is to create a non-punitive environment. In other words, anyone who reports a safety issue is assured that they won't be punished. And also incentives can be furnished for employees to report safety issues. Most airlines have an aviation safety action program. Who does an airline work with on the ASAP? Well, airlines typically will enter into a safety partnership with the Federal Aviation Administration. The ASAP could also include a third party, for example, a labor union. Most airlines, pilot groups are organized, and so airline pilot unions like ALPA are typically involved in the ASAP. Another proactive safety program is known as LOSA, L-O-S-A. What does that stand for, and how would you describe a LOSA? LOSA stands for Line-Oriented Safety Audit, and it's voluntary. It's a formal process that uses highly trained observers, usually other pilots when it comes to flight operations. And these pilots collect safety-related data on regular scheduled flights. If you work for an airline that has a LOSA, it's important to remember that it's more of an assessment rather than a safety audit. The word audit has negative connotations. A LOSA is an assessment of operational safety. An observer rides in the jump seat and assesses crew strategy for managing threats and errors. So a highly experienced pilot will sit in the jump seat and just observe. There's no debrief. The observations are conducted with a guarantee that the participants, the pilots' identities, will remain confidential. AQP is another proactive safety program, but it's actually an airline training program. AQP stands for Advanced Qualification Program, and many airlines have AQPs to train and qualify their crews. An AQP departs from traditional task-based training. Task-based training means that you're trained to do certain tasks like maneuvers or stall recovery, and then trained to proficiency. This is a process to qualify, train, and certify airline crews and make sure that they're competent using crew resource management. So how does it differ from traditional training requirements? Well, participation is voluntary, so airlines are not required to have an AQP, and it can employ innovative training and qualification concepts as long as it meets the same goals as a traditional training program for Part 121 and Part 135 operators. Well, that's the end of Presentation 7 on proactive safety programs. Our next presentation will cover aircraft safety systems.